change is what you instinctively do when you change direction, okay? So there are, in my opinion, there are 3 pivots, there are 3 transitions, there are 3 impacts leading to basically 1 follow through. Okay, so if I draw a line on the down the line view from the hosel through the trail elbow out the back, okay? So when I see that person swing at it with speed, I have a track man, so I'm like, okay, your fast move is 6 and out. Your arms fall in the downswing, and you have good depth. Okay, so what do we got to do to make that 6 or 7 to the right path head toward a more repeatable path? So I will either alter their pivot, alter their arm, or alter the ball position depending on what it is that they do. So once again, if I'm dealing with a tall player, long arms, narrow chest, you can bet your life on it there's going to be a significant arm drop coming down. And if I'm teaching somebody that's barrel chested, there's probably not going to be much lifting, not much dropping going on in the arm swing. So it's more of a situation of my job is to get their golf swing to load onto plane. So there are, there's the swing that goes up and drops on the plane. There's the swing that's kind of on the plane, and then there's the under, over motion. So my job is to detect what it is that they do naturally in the transition, and then put their backswing in a position so that that natural instinctive move loads onto plane. If I can get that to happen, they're going to hit the ball solid. And they're here because they're not hitting it solid. So as soon as I get them to hit the ball solid, I'm trying to get a predictable and reliable path-face relationship. So whatever shot they hit, whether it be a draw or a fade, is way more reliable. As soon as that occurs, their confidence is high, and I have them, pretty much. Now my job is to get them to have a predictable curvature and carry with all of their clubs, so that we can begin the process of mathematically disassembling the golf course. As soon as I have the ability to have a repeatable golf swing that gives a repeatable curve and distance to their golf shot, my job is to get underneath the hood and help them understand how they play their best golf, and how all of the stored muscle memory that's in your brain comes out of your fingers into that golf club. You cannot outperform your self-image. Your self-image is all of God's gifts given to you, minus the interference that you put in front of it. My job is to eliminate the interference that is occurring to your physical motion, so that you can perform as close to your God-given talent as possible, whether that be at the tour level, college level, 12 handicap level, whatever it is. My job is to get you as close to what God gave you as I can. As soon as we understand the emotional and mental restraints that you have built into your interferences, we now have gone the full circle, the full gamut of what it is that you need to do to get better, and then that cycle just keeps on refining, and it never ever ends, because if you play this game long enough, we know there's no such thing as perfect. But the cool thing about there's no such thing as perfect is that means there's no limit to how good you can be. So at the end of the day, I'm largely a speed producer that goes quickly into the mental parts of the game and understanding how you access your talent, or what it is that you do that turns on the wrong part of your brain that interferes with what you already know. And I call that job security.
Brian, I thought you had a good question to kick us off with, so we'll let you ask that question first.
So what happens when skill acquisition interferes with speed production?
I would say that we don't go into skill acquisition until we can identify what their speed limit is, right? So as soon as if somebody goes at it at 90% and they can't keep their balance, and that means they can't hit the center of the club face, then I have to bring it down to what is their speed limit. And as soon as they have their speed limit, now we can go into the skill acquisition of, and I'm imagining you're talking about the shot making and the ability to score from 100 yards and in and all those pieces. It all, in my opinion, it all starts with finding out how fast they can move onto the plane that they can produce. And as soon as that happens, we begin the process of putting the skill acquisition in, because it starts with repeatability of curvature and distance for all shots.
I'm gonna go ahead and ask the next question here. You talked about putting it on a plane. Obviously that plane would probably have, let's call it a stock shot or a common pattern to it. When a different shot shoot has to happen, that players acquired their speed and your definition of that, how does that change when we have to now all of a sudden produce a different path to produce a ball flight?
So my game plan is I move the ball position. Okay, so the whatever motion that they have, I'm doing my very best to make it plus or minus 2, 2.5, so that the movement change that's required to get the path to go to the other side of 0 to hit the shot they're trying to employ, I can move the ball back from where they are if they're at -2 fader, right-handed golfer. I can move the ball back, and I don't know how much I'll move it back, but I will make that same motion because the ball's back in the arc, because it's an arc. The path would have to go more in to out, and once that occurs, we now can mark like, oh, so if I'm going to turn this ball over a little, I got to move it back 2 balls. If I'm going to move it back a lot, I'm going to have to move it back 3, maybe 3.5 balls. Because under the gun, when you're asked your brain to hit a shot that is not your norm, that instantly wants to trigger the prefrontal cortex to get involved, which ultimately slows down your muscle motion because it's not normal. It's not what we normally do. So the more I can take off of your plate in your thought process, the easier it is for you to hit it under the gun. So I'll move the ball back if they need it to draw, if they're natural drawers. I'll move the ball forward and I'll make their exact same motion, head more to the left. Once again, taking things off their plate, and allows them to have less interference under the stress of competing, whether that's a tour event or the club championship or a 4-person scramble for the American Cancer Society. Everybody wants to do the best that they can do. That's what I do. I just put the ball on a different part of the arc so that they don't have to worry about changing like how they load the golf club, change their grip, twist the club face closed or more open. I just move it in the circle.
So you've referenced the importance of playing several times at a good philosophy. What is the plane? How would we measure that? And then when you say, talk about the club and relationships with the plane, what part of the plane?
I would say that the plane is the path that person's swinging on off of TrackMan. So I don't really say that it has to come down the line. It's like when you make your natural move, it's going 3.4 to the left. So I'm going to do something to make it travel more to the right. And whenever that shows a good number, I'll use that line as a vague indicator of your best version of you. Now that can evolve, and it hardly ever evolves to be more than 2 or 3 degrees ever. As the better players get better, they'll have usually a shallower attack to the downswing. But generally speaking, I don't really think there is a plane. It's just when I see them, the TrackMan says, oh, it's 4 to the left, and I've made the movement get better. We'll use that line that it creates as a good baseline for us. And generally speaking, like 99% of the time, it hardly ever varies off that line. Obviously there's an outlier question for every single thing that we're going to talk about today, so we already know that. But generally speaking, that's how I do it. And my first line is just a line from the hosel through the trail elbow. And some people come down steeper than that line and have a positive positive path, but not many. And some people get under that line and have a left path. So it's like, there's no such thing as the plane, but it's their plane, and I just bend it in a direction that better behooves them to play better golf.
I'll take the first follow-up question here, because I kind of want to go down that path, maybe, or that train of thought a little bit more, not to keep using the same words here. So, you speak about speed, obviously this is a three-dimensional movement, there's attack angles involved, and then even things like dynamic loft and ultimately spin loft and attack angles and how that all plays out. If the speed part of that interferes with, say, the desirable spin loft to produce a desirable launch, how does that get played out from more of that launch condition side, if we're looking first more from the path where attack angle can play such a vital role into that?
Well, here's how I see that. I'm not sure that I've ever said anything to anybody about their spin loft at a 12 handicap level, an 8 handicap level, or like a 2 handicap level. Where it all starts for most people is that they're hitting it better and it's predictable, and only at the super highest level does it have to come out of a certain window. And until somebody gets to that level of place, nudging somebody from 78 to 75 doesn't have much to do with spin loft, and nudging them from 75 to 72 doesn't have much to do with spin loft, as it does skill acquisition and their ability to trust what they already know that they can do, whether it comes out higher than desired, lower than desired, overdrawing or over fading. If it's predictable, we can get them to manage their game to shoot lower scores, and then as they advance, they realize that there aren't many people that play on the highest level that their launch direction is outside of 2. And there aren't many people that hit up on their 4-iron. There aren't many people that hit 9 down on their 7-iron. But we always leave room for the outlier, but generally speaking, we're always trying to find a norm. But I haven't really ever gotten myself in a situation where I'm looking at my TrackMan numbers, trying to pinpoint spin loft or dynamic loft until we get into the absolute weeds of professional golf. And I don't really think that even most people even recognize that as something that they can measure, versus using things that help them make their delivery into the golf ball more consistent and more reliable 95% of the time when they're playing whatever kind of golf they're choosing for.
I have a question. So you also mentioned ball position being pretty important to affecting what a person does. Have you ever moved somebody's ball position and then have seen that affect their movements down the road? In other words, you take somebody who is doing something, you determine they benefit from having the ball back. Have you ever seen moving the ball back then lead to something else down the road?
Oh, for sure. Oh yeah, to me, how I view it is like this. Obviously, because I teach a lot of good players, a lot of people that come see me hook the golf ball. So I'll move the ball forward and keep moving it forward until their path gets more reliable. And then as the ball moves more forward, historically I've seen less movement off the ball so that they stay centered better. So now that maybe, it might take a year, but at some point, with that ball being far forward, all of a sudden that path gets -5, and then we can move the ball back into what I call normal ball position. But when you have been a player who has, for one reason or another, put yourself in a position that when you start down, the hips go too far forward, the club falls too far underneath, and now all of a sudden I move that ball off the inside of your left heel, you can't find the golf ball from there. Like, oh, I can't even hit the ball. So then their head stays still, or the back swing goes a little more vertical. They don't get as off, they don't sway or what have you, they have less pivot issues. But once you change that motion over time, it may get, and then you can just move it back to what we consider normal. But in my opinion, in my history of coaching golf, I've had very little success changing the go move from when it goes here to when they hit the gas. I I haven't really had a whole lot of success changing somebody who is an under-over player like Vicar, gets it in and loads it up, Sam Sneadish, Hale Irwinish, and then there's plenty of people that get it up high and drop it down. I've never really taken somebody who took it up high and dropped it down to get them under-over in my life. I've found that anybody that wants to change their transition move is quickly headed to off the enjoyment train of their golf career. So my job is to keep what they do naturally and move the ball position, and then we'll evolve it. And then if it gets too far, first of all, they probably just played 4 or 5 years of the greatest golf they could have ever imagined, and then we'll come back, and then it will neutralize itself over time. And that, to me, is one of the most important parts of my coaching, is that nobody ever feels like they go through an overhaul. Nobody ever feels like it's been a massive change, because their authentic motion stays the same, generally speaking, and they can, once they learn how to change the circle, things get better, and it's less thought, and it allows them to play fairly quickly while going through the change.
I'm gonna go back to plane versus path, because it sounds like they're universally the same in your context. So, what if we're trying to get the club on a plane to deliver the club on the proper path? What's like define kind of what you're discussing just a little bit more in depth, so we can grasp a better understanding.
Well, when I'm talking to 95% of the world, the path is their plane. So when I'm saying that's maybe a habit of discussion, but the path is the plane that I'm talking about, what it is that they are doing. So if their path is 6 to the right, I'm telling them that their plane is going more to the right than it needs to be. So we're going to bend the path, but in their world, they think that is plane. And I, generally speaking, if I feel the urgency to correct them grammatically to the science of the golf swing, I'll make the delineation. But at the end of the day, the path number that I get off the TrackMan, in my mind, when I'm talking to them, that's the easiest way for me to say, you're playing the swing, the direction that you're moving is going too far to the left. We're going to crowbar that bad boy a little more to the right, and your plane is going to go more to the right. It is their path, but for the sake of talking to the average person who doesn't walk around with a TrackMan, that's the terminology that I use. But like I said, there's no such thing as the plane. It's what do they do compared to the target line with the 3D ballistics. What do they do? And my job is to bend it in a repeatable direction without authentically changing their fingerprint so that they can play pretty quickly.
We'll take a question or two from the crowd. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask Virgil?
I pretty much play a straight ball. Everybody says it's a tough shot. I always play that. I've got a college student right now. He wants to play a cut shot off the tee and draw in the green. And I read recently that it's probably one of the worst things to do, because you're gonna double cross yourself more often than not. You guys believe in that?
Yeah, go for it.
To me, a lot of people are going that route because the driver heads are designed for more fade bias anyway. I really don't push draw or fade on anybody, but as soon as I get a player that comes up with a club head speed over 113 or 115, I'm gonna probably move that ball position toward the big toe, the middle toe, of their left foot, try to get them to swing at it kind of as fast as they can go. And I have a couple people that are like maybe 3 inches ahead of their big toe, and they'll hit the path that's to the left, but it looks like it's slotted pretty good. It's not over the top, and they hit titanic bomb fades. So, but I don't really believe in taking somebody that doesn't draw the ball and force them into a draw. in somebody's career. I'm more inclined, once again, to teach a lot of good players. So like, my job is to refine what they do. So if they're a drawer of the golf ball in their irons and they want to be able to not worry about the hook off the tee, probably gonna move that ball forward, get the shoulder slightly open, and let's see what happens. Over 90% of the time, that's the only thing that ends up happening. They get what they want. But generally speaking, you're going to start to see more and more and more people, unless they do something with the driver head. It's really hard to draw the driver today. So they're just moving the ball forward and like literally swing as hard as you possibly can and watch it fade. But iron shot, I'm more inclined, like, what do you do? Especially like, you're choking nervous. You're trying to beat somebody that you've never beat before. You got water in front of the green and a bunker you can't get up and down from on the left. And what are you gonna do? What shot are you relying on right now? Because that's who we're really fixing. We're not really fixing, you know, the 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Top Golf, relaxed golf swing. I can't tell you how many people that I teach that do something in my studio and like, I still keep shooting, you know, mid-70s, but I never hit it as good on the golf course as I do with you. Like, well, let's go play 9 holes. And quickly we see they don't know how to walk into the ball. They, you know, in my studio, it's easy to aim square into the screen, but all of a sudden we get on the golf course, now they can't aim. So like they have to be taught how to walk into the ball and like how the pre-shot routine works and all the little things. And that's what makes like golf so interesting. Is like, hell, half the time we're giving golf lessons. Somebody's asking us to help them with their golf game. The person that shows up to hit balls on the lesson tee isn't even close to the person they are. Choking nervous on a golf course, playing against people they wanted to beat all their life and never done it. And to me, that's because that's largely what I do for a living, is to do that. You know, that's how I view it. It's like you got to deal with who are you literally under duress and work your way back, not try to work your way to there.
Well, I think you had, or you wanted to say something, so I'm gonna let you.
Can I?
Yeah, go for it.
Just so I understand, you're saying you heard it was the worst thing to do to fake a driver and draw the irons? Is that right?
Trying to work it both ways, because you end up mixing the two together. And this kid is a perfect example of, he has some wild misses. He might be trying to get a cut shot, and he might get it 60 yards left of left, and the next shot, he may try to hit a draw, and he may get it 60 yards right of right. His dispersion is 120 yards sometimes.
So are you saying?
I'm trying to get you to stick with one shot only. If you like a cut shot, get a cut shot. Get a cut shot only 100% of the time. Never, unless you're in trouble behind trees, you have to hook it. You have to know how to do that thing. But unless if you're in the middle of the fairway, and you're trying to carve it into a pin or something, I told you, I said, don't try that.
So I think intentionality comes into play here, but I will say, like, when I look at better players, collegiate players, tour players, one thing that I see more and more is players cutting the driver, drawing the irons. The reason for this is because better players generally don't like to change their alignment. So if I set up to a driver and I aim straight and I hit up on it, my net path is going to be left, and it's going to tend to fade, all things being equal, right? So like not necessarily setting out to do that, that's just the result of ball position being forward, how I'm aligned, etc. They generally don't like to aim differently. So if they then go and hit their approach shot into a green, they're going to aim in the same place, generally, and now the net result of hitting down on it will produce a draw. So if the question is, you know, should I try to cut a driver on one hole, draw a driver? I wouldn't, but if I'm going to, you know, be a competitive player and I make a swing and that nets out or yields a fade, and then with my irons it yields a draw, we're seeing more and more of that at more competitive levels. So that's what I would say to that.
And I would agree with everything you just said. I think maybe the defense of that, saying one, I agree one way or the other, is what I would call club face confusion. If you're going to be a great fader of the ball, you want to start it left so it can fade. If you you want to be a drawer, you want to start it right and have it draw. So I think you could go down either avenue. From a physics standpoint, the same golf swing will produce two different curves. The club face, which side of the barrel of a double shot, of a barrel of a shotgun, right, could be the defense the other way to that same question.
So is you know, and again, you can do anything, right? But what are you going to see with the face as the ball gets more forward? You're going to see more left, right? So again, like without changing anything, like that's what you might get, right? Now you can obviously do anything.
Yeah.
I was curious too, Virgil, how do you implement or do you implement like swing thoughts or in the mental situation? What are you thinking about when you're going to hit that shot under pressure?
How do I do it?
Or you know, are you like Dr. Bob would tell, what are their swing thoughts going into that shot? So you're teaching them the mechanics, but then how do they mentally tell themselves what to do in that situation?
Well, each one is unique. Well, I'll tell you the science behind what I understand as it pertains to the brain is that each person is going to have a unique feel for what it is that they need to do with the mechanics that they're doing versus their habit, right? So then it's the people who are the greatest at anything have the most vivid visualizations. Then your ability to rehearse the motion to produce the shot you're asking yourself to produce is the second part of that. And then the ability to move from thanks to Pia and Lynn, move out of the think box into the play box and hit it as quickly as you can without rushing is essential, because if you can hit it as quickly as you can without rushing, you do not allow emotional or mental interference to block what it is that you committed to. And in my years of working with the tour players that I've had great success with, is they can stay in the think box as long as they want. But as soon as they've committed, they need to get in there and get it over with as quickly as possible. And Brandt's a great visual. I mean, most people think he's a super fast player. He's a super fast player once he crosses into the play box. But he's very diligent back here, thinking about seeing what he wants, feeling what he wants. And as soon as that's it, in my opinion, the best players in the world are radically decisive. And when they cross over, they don't let anything else get into their head. And in my opinion, we all know that player that we've coached or been around, that we always wonder why they didn't make it, is largely what happens between the think box and the play box, and how much interference is brought in to the mind before they pull the trigger. Because at a certain point, all these guys on TV are really, really good. All of them. Now, obviously, there are some that are significantly better than others talent-wise, but it's that gap right there, how quickly they can commit, and how decisive they are in their intention to do so, and how quickly they get it out of there.
As you guys can see, this panel and Virgil, thank you so much. Put a lot of thought into this, and we appreciate you asking or answering really hard questions. We're gonna oddly be on time so far, which is a miracle. Brian, we're gonna let you kind of step forward now, share your thoughts, and then we'll ask some questions.
So I believe in developing a relationship first with the student and work with that student to figure out what they really want to do. Then I'll look at limitations that the player may or may not have. And I'm a big believer that it doesn't matter if you're 4 or if you're 104, you've got some sort of limitation in your golf swing. Physical, not just mental, but physical limitations. And so then I begin to work on hand path and release points in the golf swing so that we can produce the fastest club head speed with the most control of the club face possible for the player to get the desired shot that they're looking for. And then we work on the mental model to help that player become the best possible player that they can become.
I'll jump us off here. You talk about physical limitations, hand path. when physical limitations run into desired hand paths and or release points, because that's kind of what you made reference to, where, how do you navigate that, and kind of where do you go when maybe that hand path that ultimately you guys desire is running up into a limitation?
So over the last 8 years, I've transitioned to being more the coach to our membership at the Golf Club of Tennessee. So I see a lot of older guys later in their career. I see a lot of shoulder injuries and stuff like that. So when I talk about hand path, so your hand path is created by your setup. So it would be kind of, just kind of show you. So if I'm set up to the golf ball here, the line that forms from my right arm up through my right shoulder is basically that desired hand path for that player. And while there's modifications that can be made to that hand path, that's our desired hand path for that player, because that's going to produce the straightest line. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. The fastest line between 2 points is also a straight line. So we're trying to modify that hand path in a place where that player can have the most success, create the most speed. That's when we look at limitations. So somebody with a rotator cuff injury or some back issues or something like that, we may get outside the box a little bit, and we may let the right elbow or trail elbow fly a little bit, because it puts them in a better position at the top of the backswing. The purpose of the backswing is to create a position at the top so you can swing the club unimpededly to impact. And so when we're looking at something like that, that's what we're really focusing on, is what's going to create that hand path with the least interference, so that they're not having to manipulate wrist angles and body language doesn't change and stuff like that.
DJ?
It's probably a two-part question. The first part is, how do you determine what's a limitation?
We look at, we discuss first, injuries, things that may have happened in other sports, car wrecks, anything else that may have happened later on in their life or earlier in their life. And then we also look at, we go through a bit of an assessment through biomechanics, looking at hip mobility, your hip flexors, your shoulder mobility, look a little bit at arm length and stuff like that. But a lot of that stuff, as you've done it over and over and over again, you kind of see up front. So usually if I see a player get to the top and I see their shoulder structure change, like the shoulder wants to drop, then I know immediately that player has some sort of limitation in the shoulder.
Okay, so the second part is, it sounds like you use some kind of screening process and then some sort of qualitative observation. The second part would be, have you ever seen somebody that you deem have a limitation and then yet swing in a way that didn't adhere to that limitation? In other words, you thought they had maybe limited shoulder mobility, and then they make a golf swing and they had more mobility in that shoulder than you maybe anticipated.
I'm going to say no to that. Again, like the guys that I'm thinking of, off the top of my head, and I'm sure there is, but like you can create. There's a difference between flexibility and mobility. So I can move my body in a place that shows a desired range of motion or a position at the top of the backswing. That's a compensation that sometimes is complex with the movement that you're trying to make in the swing. So I don't find anybody that's got, if they have, exterior issues in their shoulder, ever get to a point where their elbow is going, the right arm is going to lay back at 25 or 30 degrees when they can only get to here. So when they go to swing the golf club, if you see a player doing that, they may rotate the forearm, get the club back, their elbow may be down, it may look like they have more rotation in the shoulder, but it's still limited, and they're just compensating for that.
Virgil, what is your definition of hand path? How do you measure it? And what other parts of the golf swing do you like to use first to manipulate said hand path?
So again, the hand path is the measurement, just a line between the wrist of the forearm. So if the player's bent, they've got a lot of bend in the right arm.
so you talked about the hand path. We didn't talk a lot about maybe how that called the pitch of the shaft, how the shaft moves in space. From your experience, have we seen hand paths that were productive, but clubs that pitched in an awkward way? And if so, how have you handled those?
So if you have somebody that's really, really good with their hands, say like a Dustin Johnson, whose hands go up a very clean hand path, and he gets the club, very laid off at the top. He's got extremely low left wrist, but he can come down and he creates the proper activity through the hands coming through. So his release point goes from severe flexion to massive extension. He's able to keep the club face square. So yeah, there's always gray areas, if we would say that, in the swing where it's like the player can get into a position that you really like with their hands, but the club head may or may not be in a position that you desire personally. But if the player is successful with that and they can repeat that under pressure, then typically I'll leave it alone.
Just so I understand, did you say at the beginning you prefer the hand path to move more in a straight line, sort of down the line? Did I understand that correctly?
That would be correct.
Would there ever be a time where curving the hand path would be advantageous?
If a player sees, like I see a cut, can't see a draw, tried to for a long time, played it in college, didn't work out for me. So I think that when a player has a desired ball flight, then you can create curvature to that path, that hand path, to establish a desired ball flight. I know we talked a little bit yesterday, about Victor seats, and for a player that doesn't see a draw, it makes no sense for the hands to curve back to the inside. So I think that's where you have to look at it from an individual standpoint. What does the player want? That's where building that relationship starts first, and see what that player really wants to achieve with his or her game, and then you do your best to make them the best that they can possibly be, which I think we all are in agreement on that here. It's like we all want our players to be the best that they can be. We're not a lot different the way we teach, just the way we view it.
Would you say that, based around your conversation about using the right arm, how important is the camera angle to you for that? Because if a person's moving on the mat 4 inches on the mat, how do you help them see the difference, even though I'm absolutely sure you know the difference between the camera moving slightly off what you're trying to do, but for people out here how important is the camera angle / how important is your ability to communicate when maybe they do something on the phone, FaceTime, what have you, and it gets a little off? How do you help people navigate the hand path when it's constantly relying on video?
Yeah, so I think the camera angle should be on the hand pad, on your hands in a dress. I know a lot of people like to see it on the club head. Some people like to see it more towards the toes. I really like to see it right on the hands. So if we're watching the way the club goes back, we're going to try to keep the club head outside your hands. In a perfect world, right? We're keeping it outside the hands all the way back, and then letting it come back down through the hands back into the golf ball. You're going to get a distorted view if the camera angle is further out towards the golf ball. So it's always going to look more inside. The further towards the ball it is, it's going to look further. Is that right? It's going to look further inside. The further out you go, and it's going to look further out the more in you go.
When you say you have that hand path, do you have it not only on the hand path but hand high, or just on the hand path?
Preferably hand high.
There you go. That's good.
And is it down parallel to the target line, parallel to their foot line, parallel to their, how would you?
Parallel to the target line.
Is anyone out in
If you're talking about drawing your hand, the hand path line from the right hand, wrist through the right shoulder, is that right shoulder set up? Because if their hands are hanging straight down, it's gonna be a pretty vertical hand path versus where when you turn into your trail side, that trail shoulder's gonna be moved back, which would make that hand path shallow. Like, do you do it off the setup or do you?
It's off the setup, yeah. So if you do that and then the player starts to turn, like that's one thing with cameras that we don't get to see. We don't get to see a three-dimensional image. So we're looking at a 2D picture. So if you do that, and we would all it's not 100% correct, right? But we kind of sort of want the hands to get to the right shoulder or the trail shoulder. So when we're taking the club back, that line, even though it doesn't move, it effectively moves with the rotation.
So on that hand path, you talked about the hand path, you like it to see it come back on that line and then back down that line? Do you ever like to see any shallow, like, do you see any speed increases when the hand's too shallow on that line?
I don't know that speed increases when it shallows. I think it's all in the way the player's loading the club on the way down, and that's what's creating speed. So the release point is where you're going to see your maximum speed through the golf swing. So as TJ asked a minute ago, is it ever okay to see that line curve? And yes, it can. I think again, it just depends on what the desired ball flight is for that player. But when I'm trying to get somebody to start, that's where I'm really wanting to see it go. And then we can say, if they're hitting a cut and they're like, I hate that, I don't want to see a cut. I'm like, I love that because I'm always right and you're left. That was a joke. Anyway, so then we might modify that a little bit.
The reason I ask is, doesn't the lever arm increase as the hand shallow? So if the hand shallow and the lever arm increases, then you are getting more speed. Is that it?
We couldn't hear you.
Didn't hear you. Oh, I'm sorry. The reason I asked was that as you shallow, the lever arm increases, correct? Is that correct? So the lever arm between the club and the center of gravity increases, so therefore when that increases, you create more speed, correct?
Maybe.
Okay. I'm just asking, I'm asking for.
It just depends on like where's your lever. Where's your lever? So does flexion, is that going to create more speed, or is extension going to create more speed? Because I can hit TJ over the head pretty hard from right here with an extended left wrist, but I'm having a hard time with a flex left wrist.
And that's why I would say your philosophy goes in, because if we're flexed here and then we go to extension, you're going to create more speed that way, right?
Correct.
What do you do if your lower left hip's not rotating? So they're swinging hard with their hands on, but the lower staying still.
So you're asking me if the lower body doesn't move?
Yeah, what do you trying to get that lower with the upward impact?
So I believe the body has to pivot. It's just what's driving the rotation. So when we talk about rotation, we say that rotation is led by the lower body, but the golf swing is not led by the lower body. So your transitional move from the top is to use your arms and hands first, and then we like to see the body respond to or kind of facilitate what your arms and hands are trying to do in the golf swing. So if I over-rotate, think baseball for example, if I'm in the plate and I start rotating as hard as I can towards third base, what's happening to the bat? The bat's getting further and further behind me and it's getting shorter, right? So in golf, what happens is we tend to catch the ball a little bit more off the toe, a little bit more over the club face, and then we start trying to stay in the shot longer, and then we start catching it off the hustle. So
Just a quick thought, like Freddie Couple, he's going past the 7, these older guys, so Freddie's not going past the 7. You start being down to see guys that say in the 4 or 5 iron, and you go to 7 with a ladder flex, or you start to do that a little bit, so trying to hit 5 or 4.
I think that's a player profile, and so this what's a player looking for out of those clubs. These guys teach a lot better players than I teach. So I would say that guys that hit the ball one way, like Noah Trinkler probably needs a driver and some wedges and a putter in his bag, and he can eliminate the mid part of his bag. I'm old older, so I'm looking at, how can I capitalize on that friend in my back?
So would you keep hand path about same durability, even if it's like, so a driver versus a iron, the arc of the swings would be longer and above it, you still keep the same hand path, just by the club changing,
Yes and no, because your setup changes. So as your setup changes, your hand path is adjusted. So as the club gets longer, it gets flatter. So technically your hand path is the same. It's still moving the same way, but you're technically moving them flatter and deeper.
Thanks. That was really well done. Thanks for putting so much thought into that. TJ, we'll let you kind of jump in and we'll start asking some questions.
So I wrote this really fluffy philosophy thesis, and you can boil what I do down to just this. I think of myself as an athlete-centered coach using evidence-based practices. So basically, at the heart of everything is the athlete, the golfer. I like to get a full background when I can, what they do, what they think about, what their concepts are, what their beliefs are, who they've worked with. Just because you start to put the picture together, right? When you get somebody's background, their concept, their intent, what they're trying to do, you start to build out a picture. When I say use evidence-led practices, it's measuring what that player does as much as we can, video, TrackMan, 3D if possible, anything else that they have to offer, force plates, kinetic data, whatever it is. Just try to get as much as you can on the background of that player. And then basically, in terms of just like a normal lesson, just reverse engineering what they do. Ball does X, club face path, angle of attack, is doing this, then you work your way up from the club to the body, body's doing this, hands doing this, and just go from there. It's a pretty basic process. I don't think it's that special. I'm sure everybody has something very similar. It's very algorithmic. From slicing the ball, the face is doing X, the path is doing Y, and we're going to do things that are going to affect it. So I don't think what I do is really all that special. It's just using what the athlete does, looking at their background, and then just taking whatever it is they're doing in front of you and trying to make a game plan around that.
In your history of coaching, have you had the greatest impact on your players by affecting their path first or their club face first? Or the attack angle? I've never heard anybody use the attack as their first move, but where do you go?
I would say on the whole, overwhelmingly so, it's the face. So usually, and to me it's irrelevant really for the player, whether they're good or a tour player or a beginning player. Let's say you have a player who's hitting it to the right. We'll say the face is open. Okay, so that player is then going to do things to try to accommodate or manage that right tendency. So swing direction moves left, alignment moves left. And you can get real deep into the weeds, how they're moving kinematically, upper torso is moving forward ahead, opening up more than the pelvis. You go right down that list. So it's not to say it's never the path, but it is overwhelmingly the face, in my opinion. That kind of leads to the rest of it.
So you've got their background, you know what they want, you've got an agenda, what you see, and especially working with the better player in the conversations we had again yesterday, kind of bring that back to the table. How much do you feel like technology deters the growth of a player versus aids them?
Well, it's a good question. I think it just depends how you use it. And I think with some players, it's a lot more helpful, and with some players, it can be a little bit more detrimental depending on, again, how they use it, right? So if you become very dependent on technology in a very controlled environment, you're going to generally have a hard time transferring that to the golf course. I think we heard Coach Limbaugh this morning talking about taking one player and just putting TrackMan away, and sometimes that's exactly what a player needs. Right? Because the environment is constantly in flux, there'll be times where grinding it out on a flat lie in a building, trying to create this number on the face and this number on the path just won't transfer to the golf course. As soon as you get uneven lies, you get ball below the feet, ball above the feet, winds, all this thing just goes out the window. So it just depends on the player how they use it.
I think a growing challenge for a lot of coaches and teachers now is the challenge of what you just said. It looks one way in a flat environment. It looks very different on the golf course, but we're having challenges getting on the golf course. I would say many of us, I mean, to the point where you're teaching predominantly indoors now. It's a big challenge. Obviously, there are some situations where we're afforded more course time than others. How are you dealing with what you're seeing out on the golf course versus the range, and how are you managing that with your players who might have one desire on the course and you're seeing different things on the range?
So, the transfer of skills to the golf course, whether it's a movement pattern or distance control, whatever it is, right? That's the challenge. And there are different strategies that you can employ to help that transfer of skills to the golf course. A lot of times I'll just have players do whatever it is we're doing, let's say indoors this time of year on the golf course. So if we put sticks down as constraints, if we use a balloon or a ball between the arms, or whatever it is you do, whatever it is you deem necessary for that student, as best as we can, I'll take them on the golf course and I'll have them do those things on the golf course. And the more we can contextualize what it is we're trying to do with the environment, the better we can transfer that skill to very difficult situations. So like if you've ever heard perception, action, coupling, right? We perceive to act a certain way in an environment. Well, if I can take whatever drill I'm doing and I can do that under the context of a very difficult situation, a situation that you would regularly face, like an approach shot into number 9, for example, then you can transfer that skill more effectively. And I think, honestly, that's one thing that can be really tough this time of year when we're indoors, is not getting out to the golf course and practicing on the golf course. So that answers the question.
One, it's super exciting to work with tour players, especially when you get a chance to work with someone at the very top of the pile that you currently are right now. When you're dealing with an elite player, one of the scariest things is knowing that they're making a living doing this, and we better be damn careful what we say. And you're also dealing with somebody who has radical creativity in his mind about what he can do, and he's very curious. How different is it coaching somebody at that level versus just like even one of the better junior players at Belmead?
What do you think, Ben? What would you say? Pretty good.
How different is it coaching a tour player versus a junior? I think you're trying to accomplish the same thing, better club-based control. I think tour players are a lot crazier.
And honestly, it's sometimes not that exciting. It's not that
I think
exciting.
it's a lot harder working with guys that are certified to be very crazy like myself and every guy.
I mean, you gotta be a little crazy to play this game for a living.
I think so.
Yeah, you gotta do things. Tour players, in my experience, tour players struggle with the same things that your high-end cats do. Right? They have real challenges. They have technique issues. They want to see a shot, they can't hit it. And they'll go down rabbit holes trying to figure out what to do. And again, like tour players have a lot of access to a lot of information. So you go to a tour event, you've got some very well-known coaches. You've got some of the best technology on earth. You've got great club reps that can tell you about the latest and greatest. You've got coaches that can tell you about whatever. You've got every piece of technology for the most part out there. So I think it's naturally, it's a normal thing rather for a tour player to be curious. Like we see that with jumping from coach to coach, right? Like they want to hear what this person has to say and what this person has to say. I think depending on the player, sometimes like you have to satisfy that curiosity. So I'll tell a player, look, just went through this. If you have to go do this to figure out if this is a good thing for you, go do it. That's fine. But I think that's a normal thing to be curious and want to explore and figure out and identify. You do have to be a little bit careful because you can sometimes go down these holes that take you down a path that's completely not right. And if I really feel strongly about that, like I'll insert myself at that point. But for the to take Mr. Smith, and if that's his objective, that's his goal, then we'll get him, in the bay and show him how to maybe generate more speed, maybe figure out how to deliver the club to the ball more effectively to optimize launch, whatever it is, and then measure it. And say, look, when you do this, this swings the club faster, this launches the ball higher, this goes farther, right? So that's the evidence-based practices. We can go in there and show proof of concept, right? We set out to create more speed, we did that. If we didn't, then obviously we have to find another route to do that, but it depends on what the player is looking for, what their goal is. But in terms of evidence-based, we're just measuring, trying to be as objective as possible.
Questions from the crowd?
Just curious, good pressure, like between a full player.
Doesn't matter. So if you're at address, the club's accelerating to 0. It's not moving, right? For the most part. Let's say like 1 frame before impact, even if you waggle a whole bunch. But as that club begins accelerating the backswing, what's going to happen to grip pressure? It's going to increase. And then as the club's speeding up, grip pressure is going to increase. And then in the late backswing into transition, the club's trying to go that way, and you're trying to slow it down, stop it, and change direction. And that's pretty violent. And the grip pressure is going to increase. And the club's going to be ramping up speed coming in impact. It's probably going to increase again. And sometime around impact, it does decrease a little bit. And then again on the front side of the swing as we try to slow the club down. So pressure is always changing. So whatever you start with at address, unless it's something like super extreme, to me, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, when you said that, the only time that really is a difference is when they're squeezing it so tight that they lose the range of motion in their hands. Other than
Extreme.
that, extreme. Other than that, I don't even function.
Yeah, if the club flies out of their hands, it's probably too long. I would look at things other than grip pressure. I will say though, in terms of grip pressure, I think if I was trying to get somebody swinging faster, I would get them to hold it tighter. I think Bryson's talked about that a lot too. So that would be maybe the only time I would really have a passive interest in grip pressure. And obviously, like grip pressure strength too can affect club speed as well. So that would be the only time I would have interest.
Work with your students to kind of gain more speed, make a difference between maybe as well, and length and speed, kind of more common than you see
In terms of speed, intent is probably the biggest one. This is a true story. I had a guy come in for a lesson, an older guy last year, and he says, I just need to hit it farther. And I said, great. And he's hitting some shots, and I said, so what do you try to do? And he goes, I just try to smooth out my tempo and slow it down. Right? So like literally, I think the thing I say the most is try to swing hard. Speed up the backswing would probably be number 2. So in terms of like low hang